Danielle lay motionless in her hospital bed, the rhythmic beeping of machines the only reassurance that her unborn child was safe. Across the room stood her husband, the powerful millionaire, Thomas Sterling, whose smooth voice had promised to stand by her forever. Yet, in the hush of night, Danielle's eyelids fluttered just enough to see Thomas murmuring on the phone. Unaware she was listening, he spoke of betrayal, lies, and a hidden agenda that would shatter everything she believed in. Little did he know that Danielle heard every word, and she would soon devise a plan to unmask his dissay. It in a way he would never forget. Danielle Thompson had always believed in the fairy tale version of love. Growing up in the scenic countryside outside Charleston, South Carolina, she had spent her childhood wandering sunflower fields and dreaming of finding a knight in shining armor. Her parents, Mark and Evelyn Thompson, owned a small but well-respected bakery and instilled in Danielle the values of hard work, honesty, and loyalty. She carried those lessons in her heart through every turn of life. At age 25, she moved to New York City with high hopes and modest savings. She had no illusions that the world was easy, but she did believe that staying true to one's moral compass could guide anyone through dark times. And for a while, this seemed to be the case. She landed a job at an art gallery, her sweet voice and discerning eye catching the attention of artists from around the world. The gallery's clientele included the city's wealthiest inhabitants, some of the most influential movers and shakers of Manhattan. And that was where she first encountered Thomas Sterling. Thomas Sterling was known as the real estate tycoon with the golden touch. By the age of 32, he owned multiple skyscrapers, luxury condominiums, and had stakes in international ventures from Dubai to Tokyo. Whispers of his success spread through art auctions and high society cocktail parties. Those who didn't admire him envied him. Those who didn't envy him feared him. When he strolled into Danielle's gallery one crisp October evening, she couldn't help but notice how the room seemed to shrink around him. His imposing figure, sharpened by a tailored suit, commanded attention without him even trying. He carried himself with the casual grace of a king inspecting his kingdom. Naturally, rumors flitted about. He had dated top actresses, traveled with private security, and gambled obscene amounts at underground poker tables, always coming out a winner. Yet, as he approached Danielle that night, he wore the confident smile of a man who knew exactly what he wanted, and what he wanted was her. Their first conversation brimmed with chemistry. She expected him to be dismissive or superficial, but his voice was soft, warm, as though he was discovering a piece of art that only he had the ability to appreciate. By the end of the evening, he casually asked for her phone number. Despite the swirl of cautionary tales about men like Thomas, Danielle couldn't resist the magnetic pull of his attention. His compliments felt sincere, his manner disarming. In the months that followed, their romance sped along like a bullet train. Lavish dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, weekend getaways in the Hamptons, and front-row seats at charity galas, Thomas transformed Danielle's modest city life into something resembling a modern-day Cinderella story. She found herself starry-eyed, enamored not just by the opulence, but by the seemingly gentle heart behind Thomas's steely exterior. Yet even in that glow, small flickers of concern nagged at Danielle. She overheard hushed phone calls where Thomas's tone shifted to an unsettling coldness. He never explicitly told her about his business dealings or the true nature of his complicated finances. Occasionally, the mention of a woman named Julia Parker came up, a name that he quickly dismissed as an old friend. Still, Danielle, both confident and trusting, brushed aside those concerns. After all, love was about trust, wasn't it? It wasn't long before Thomas proposed, slipping a diamond ring onto Danielle's finger that practically screamed for paparazzi attention. Everyone who knew Danielle called it a real-life fairy tale, and in that moment, she believed it was. Long before Manhattan's dazzling lights and her introduction to Thomas Sterling, Danielle had lived a life grounded in humble aspirations. At 17, she dreamed of becoming a painter, someone whose work could move hearts and inspire the human soul. She would stay up late in her bedroom, sketching her future on canvases that absorbed her hopes and fears. After moving to the city, she tried to attend the Pratt Institute for a formal education in fine arts, but the tuition fees were beyond her reach. Instead, she worked multiple part-time jobs, waiting tables at a small Italian bistro, guiding tourists at a local museum, and eventually landing at the art gallery that changed her life. Throughout those early years, Danielle also developed a quiet resilience. Life in New York was never simple, and she encountered more than her fair share of rejection and heartbreak. A brief relationship with a fellow artist ended when he abandoned her for a European tour. The rent soared every year, forcing her to live in cramped apartments with paper-thin walls. But she never lost that spark of determination in her eyes. Each disappointment served as a stepping stone. Every closed door reminded her to push harder. It was during this period that she met an older mentor, Dr. Robert Jenkins, a professor at a local community college, who recognized Danielle's knack for storytelling through art. He offered her free auditing opportunities in his classes, explaining that formal education wasn't the only path. Raw passion was often more important. He encouraged her to channel her love of color and form in any setting. The sessions they spent together over coffee and discounted art supplies helped Danielle forge an identity that was true and confident. Despite her struggles, Danielle remained ever the optimist. She volunteered at a women's shelter every other weekend, helping survivors of domestic abuse express themselves through sketching and painting. It was there she learned the true meaning of emotional strength and the complexity of real-world relationships. So when Thomas Sterling waltzed into her life and expressed admiration for her artistic sensibilities, it felt like a vindication of her years of perseverance. Here was a man who not only recognized her talent, but was willing to support her dreams in ways no one else had. He connected her to influential art collectors and introduced her to philanthropic circles that funded community art programs for underprivileged youth. At times, Danielle had to pinch herself to believe that this was really happening. Was she finally living the life she had always fantasized about in those late-night sketching sessions? Yes, there were shadows. She noticed them in the distance, creeping behind Thomas's overly polished stories. But she told herself she was strong enough to handle any truth that emerged. After all, she had faced hardships before. This time she had love on her side, didn't she? Outside the swirl of Manhattan's glitz, Danielle's parents, Mark and Evelyn, offered measured support. They saw how happy she appeared, but couldn't help worrying that it was all happening too fast. Her mother voiced concerns that Danielle dismissed with a gentle laugh. "Mum, trust me, he's amazing. Wait until you meet him." Her father quietly nodded but reserved judgment. It was a significant leap from small-town bakery to high society, and Mark wanted to see how this fairy tale would hold up over time. Their wedding date was set. Without delay, Danielle began planning a modest yet elegant ceremony at a stately church on the Upper East Side. She wore the gown of her dreams, courtesy of a famous designer Thomas befriended during a gala. Friends and family flew in from South Carolina to witness what everyone assumed was the start of a blissful life together. And in the background, Thomas's phone rarely stopped buzzing with business calls and text messages that he insisted were unavoidable. Little did Danielle know that the seeds of deception had already been planted. The wedding took place on a breezy June afternoon, the kind of day that made Danielle believe the universe was smiling down on her. Clusters of lavender roses adorned the pews, while an organist played gentle melodies echoing through the church's high ceilings. Danielle walked down the aisle, her heart pounding as she caught sight of Thomas in a fitted tuxedo. He looked regal, every bit the prince she had allowed herself to hope for. Their vows were exchanged in front of nearly 200 guests, including city dignitaries, socialites, and a sprinkling of close friends from Danielle's quieter world. Everyone who spoke that day talked about the couple's magnetic connection. Thomas's best man, a suave investment banker named Daniel Wu, made a speech lauding Thomas's tenacity and generosity. Danielle's maid of honor, her childhood friend Sarah Greenfield, praised Danielle's big-hearted spirit. The merging of their worlds felt seamless in that radiant moment. After the ceremony, they headed to a grand ballroom reception at the Fitzgerald Hotel overlooking Central Park. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, and the sound of laughter and champagne glasses clinking enveloped the room. Danielle, radiant in her lace bridal gown, couldn't stop smiling. Thomas was by her side, whispering sweet nothings into her ear as guests danced beneath an orchestra's tune. It was, by all appearances, a perfect union. For the first few months, married life glimmered with promise. They moved into Thomas's penthouse on the Upper West Side, a sprawling home of glass walls, stunning city views, and modern art carefully curated to impress. Danielle set up a small art studio in one corner, finally able to indulge in her long-desired passion whenever she wished. Thomas, for his part, opened up about various philanthropic initiatives. He poured money into the city's food banks, financed cultural festivals, and sponsored an emerging artists' fellowship in Danielle's name. Yet as the honeymoon phase tapered, Danielle began to see cracks. Despite being physically present, Thomas was often distant. He'd lock himself in his study, holding private phone calls that ended abruptly when she knocked on the door. More often than not, business trips took him away for days, sometimes weeks, at a stretch. He would return bearing expensive gifts, designer handbags, rare jewelry, plane tickets to exotic locales, but never quite explained why he had to travel so frequently. Even more unnerving, Danielle started noticing a pattern in his excuses. He would say he was flying to Toronto for a deal, but receipts would show a hotel in Miami. Or he'd claim a business meeting in London, only for a housekeeper to mention she'd washed a Hawaiian shirt of his right before he left. Each time Danielle questioned him, Thomas brushed off her concerns with the same confident dismissals. "Darling, these deals are complicated. I have partners worldwide." Sometimes the paperwork says one thing, the real location is another. It's all business. And there was the matter of Julia Parker, a name that popped up far more often than Danielle was comfortable with. Thomas insisted that Julia was merely a colleague, someone involved in property acquisitions. But Danielle recalled the hush that fell over him whenever that name came up, as though he was tiptoeing through a minefield. She tried to push away the suspicions, telling herself that trust was essential in a marriage. Hadn't she promised to stand by him in sickness and in health? Tension simmered beneath the surface. Danielle felt the dissonance more acutely with each passing day. She couldn't pinpoint it exactly, but something about Thomas's life felt staged, as though he was directing a grand performance rather than living an authentic existence. Yet, every time she tried to approach the topic head-on, he skillfully deflected her, leaving her doubting her own instincts. Their social circle didn't offer clarity either. Thomas's millionaire acquaintances spoke in coded business jargon that Danielle struggled to follow. She'd watch them exchange knowing looks or sly grins when the conversation drifted towards certain real estate projects or hush-hush deals. Was it just professional secrecy? Or were they all in on some hidden scheme? Despite these swirling uncertainties, the news that Danielle was pregnant arrived like a burst of sunshine. She discovered it on a chilly December morning, the faint pink lines on the test jolting her heart with equal parts excitement and anxiety. When she told Thomas, he seemed genuinely delighted, lifting her into a joyous embrace. For a moment, Danielle believed that perhaps all those secrets would fade into the background. A baby might bring them together in a way that dispelled the shadows lingering around their marriage. But life rarely follows such a neat narrative. Instead, it weaves complicated threads that can ensnare even the most hopeful hearts. Pregnancy changed everything. Danielle's once boundless energy was channeled into prenatal care and preparing for motherhood. She spent hours poring over baby name books, researching the best strollers, and envisioning a cozy nursery. Initially, Thomas played the role of supportive husband. He accompanied her to a few doctor's appointments, making sure she had the best obstetricians in the city. With his wealth, he could buy her any comfort she needed: ergonomic rocking chairs, top-of-the-line infant cribs, even a designer changing table that arrived in 3 separate shipping crates. Yet, as Danielle's belly grew, so did the distance between them. Thomas's late-night phone calls became more frequent. His apologies for missing dinner morphed from somewhat plausible explanations to vague and half-hearted excuses. He brushed off her concerns about the baby's future with a single phrase: "We have plenty of time, Danielle. Let me handle the financials." It wasn't just the lies themselves, though they were growing alarmingly obvious, but also Thomas's demeanor. He was jittery, prone to sudden mood swings. On good days, he showered her with affection, massaged her feet, and whispered about the beautiful life they would share with their child. On bad days, he'd snap at her unprovoked, vanish for hours, and return with a forced smile that did nothing to hide the tension in his eyes. A chance discovery worsened her suspicions. While tidying up his office one afternoon, Danielle found a crumpled piece of paper with a note scrawled in hurried handwriting: "Meeting at the Grand Regent, Suite 2204, 8 p.m. She recognized the date just 2 days prior, when Thomas had told her he was in Boston on a day trip. The Grand Regent was in the heart of Manhattan, a 10-minute cab ride from their penthouse. That same day, while putting away laundry, she spotted an envelope stashed behind one of Thomas's seldom-used cufflink boxes. It bore the name Julia Parker on the return address, and inside were 2 tickets to a charity gala in Paris, scheduled for the next month. Tickets issued in the name of Thomas Sterling and Julia Parker. The implication was chilling. Fear, anger, and heartbreak pummeled Danielle in waves. She tried confronting Thomas that evening. "Thomas, where were you 2 nights ago? You told me you were in Boston. But I found this note: the Grand Regent, 8 p.m. What's going on?" He froze, then half laughed, as if he found her accusation absurd. "Danielle, you're pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. You probably misread something. Trust me, I have no idea what that note is about." His eyes narrowed as he added, "And as for Julia Parker, I've told you before, she's a colleague. We work together on complicated transactions. Sometimes we attend events side by side, nothing more." His dismissive tone cut deeper than any explanation could have. Whether it was betrayal or just secrecy, Danielle knew something was fundamentally wrong. The man she married, the one she had thought was her prince, was weaving a web of lies around her. She also knew that confronting him head-on wasn't likely to yield answers. Thomas was too cunning, too adept at misdirection. Though unsure of her next steps, Danielle resolved one thing: she wouldn't be played for a fool. She carried precious life inside her, and she would protect her child no matter what it took. So she decided to stay vigilant, to gather more information. Eventually, the truth would emerge, she was sure of that. And on the night she discovered Thomas's ultimate deception, she realized she was about to face the biggest fight of her life. It happened on a Wednesday night, in late spring, around her 6th month of pregnancy. Danielle had been feeling faint spells for several days, and the obstetrician advised her to take it easy. She tried to rest, but persistent headaches and a nagging sense of dread made it impossible. One evening, she nearly collapsed while preparing dinner. Alarmed, Thomas took her to Mount Sinai Hospital. The emergency department was a flurry of activity, crying infants, anxious parents, doctors, bustling from one patient to the next. Danielle was admitted for observation to ensure her baby's heartbeat was stable. A mild complication in her blood pressure readings warranted an overnight stay. As she lay in a private room, her eyes fluttering between consciousness and exhaustion, Thomas hovered by her bedside. For a moment, she felt relief. At least he's here, she thought. At least he cares enough to make sure we're okay. But in the early hours, long after midnight, Danielle awoke to the faint glow of a hospital lamp. Her eyes adjusted to see Thomas perched in a corner, phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. Without any outward sign that she was awake, Danielle listened. The conversation changed everything. "We can't push this further, Julia," he hissed. "I'm telling you, the timeline is compromised. Danielle's condition is messing up the schedule." A pause. Yes, I know. But can't you handle things on your end for now? I'll be back in the office soon. Just stop calling me here. She suspects enough as it is." Danielle's heart thumped so loudly she worried he would hear it. Julia Parker. She's not just a colleague, Danielle thought. Her worst suspicions confirmed. The conversation continued, peppered with references to offshore accounts, shadowy deals, and someone named Victor. Danielle's mind raced. She couldn't catch every word, but she gathered enough to know Thomas was neck-deep in something illicit, and Julia was his willing accomplice. When Thomas turned off the phone, he approached the bed. Danielle fought to regulate her breathing, pretending to be asleep. She felt his hand hover over her forehead, as if checking her temperature. Then he slipped out of the room. She heard the door click quietly behind him. Shaken, Danielle turned onto her side, eyes wide open. Her entire world was crumbling. This wasn't just about infidelity or secret business dealings. It was about a massive, orchestrated deception. She realized she didn't actually know what kind of man Thomas was. He could be an international criminal or someone laundering money through elaborate property deals. Worse, if these deals were going under, what would he do next? Danielle was carrying his child. Did he feel any genuine love for them at all? She was discharged the following day with instructions to rest at home. Thomas played the attentive husband role during the final paperwork, but she noticed how restless he was. The phone never left his hand, and he was visibly relieved once they left the hospital. He escorted her into a car, said a quick goodbye, and told her he had urgent business to handle. Before Danielle could reply, he was gone. As she sat in the back seat, the city's skyline loomed overhead like a silent witness. Danielle's suspicion hardened into resolve. She had enough. Enough of being lied to, manipulated, and kept in the dark while her life was potentially in danger. She looked down at her growing belly and felt a fierce protective instinct surge. If Thomas was entangled in illegal activities or planning something that could harm them, she needed to protect herself and her baby. But how? Thomas's power and wealth were formidable. Confronting him openly would likely end with him denying everything. She needed a strategy that would force the truth out of him, leaving no room for cunning denials. And so, the seeds of a plan began to form in her mind, a scheme that would require her to be more cunning than she ever believed possible. Returning to the penthouse felt like stepping onto a stage set for a one-woman show. Danielle paced from room to room, imagining the secrets hidden in plain sight. She pressed her fingers against the ornate wallpaper, rummaged through Thomas's study, and pulled open file cabinets in search of anything that might confirm her suspicions. As the hours wore on, she found partial evidence: bank statements with large sums transferred out of the country, cryptic emails referencing multi-party investments, and records of frequent meetings with Julia Parker in luxurious hotels. Yet, there was one chilling discovery that eclipsed all the others. Inside a locked drawer in Thomas's desk, which she pried open with a hairpin, she found a red folder labeled Project Dawn. The contents were a series of documents detailing an elaborate financial arrangement that involved buying distressed properties, inflating their value through fraudulent appraisals, and flipping them to shell companies overseas. The scale of the operation was astounding, involving millions of dollars. Julia Parker's signature appeared on multiple pages as a consultant, while Thomas's name featured as the main stakeholder. Danielle's head spun. This is beyond anything I imagined. She remembered stories of white-collar criminals who destroyed lives with paper trails. Her heart pounded, but beneath her shock lay a cold, firm determination. If these documents made it into the hands of the authorities, Thomas would almost certainly face charges. However, it wasn't just about the legality. The moral betrayal was staggering. She had married a man who might very well be orchestrating a grand-scale fraud. That night, Thomas returned home late. He moved about with caution, like a predator sensing a trap. Over a rushed dinner, Danielle finally confronted him. "Thomas, we need to talk. I'm worried about us and our baby. Are we safe? Is there something going on with your business that I should know about?" He sighed dramatically. "Danielle, I've told you 100 times. You're imagining worst-case scenarios. My deals are perfectly legitimate." He offered a half-smile, but his eyes darted sideways. "I know you worry, especially now that you're pregnant. But trust me, I'm ensuring our future is secure." A swirl of emotions coursed through Danielle: rage, betrayal, heartbreak. She bit her tongue, stopping herself from exposing what she had found. Something in her gut told her that if Thomas realized she had knowledge of his crimes, the consequences could be dire. Instead, she played the part of the docile wife, nodding and feigning relief. That night, as Thomas slept, she slipped back into his study and snapped photos of the Project Dawn files with her phone. It was risky. Her heart thudded so loudly. She was convinced it would wake him, but she had to secure evidence. She saved the images to a password-protected folder and then stashed the physical documents back in the drawer, making sure everything looked untouched. By dawn, Danielle found herself standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, staring at the city skyline. She pressed her hand against her unborn child and made a silent vow. "I will protect us from this web of lies, and I will uncover the truth, no matter what it costs me." In that moment of clarity, a plan sharpened in her mind. It wasn't just about confronting Thomas or turning him in. She needed something more foolproof, a way to ensure that when the truth came out, Thomas wouldn't slip away with a well-paid legal team or hush money. She recalled the conversation she overheard in the hospital, how Thomas had been reckless in admitting certain details. A faint idea sparked. What if she recorded his confession, gathered enough evidence to force him to face the law without any escape? Her father's old advice echoed in her mind. "Danielle, people can't wriggle free of their own words. That's how you hold them accountable." She smiled sadly at the memory, recalling a time when life was simpler and moral absolutes were easier to uphold. Now, however, she was about to step into a world of deception more complex than any dream or nightmare she had imagined. Confronting a millionaire husband with near limitless resources was no small task. Danielle realized she needed more than just stealthily snapped photos or partial recordings. She needed a scenario so controlled and dramatic that Thomas's own words would condemn him. But how to ensure he spoke freely, how to trap him into revealing enough to make him legally vulnerable. She mulled over various scenarios: secret microphones, private investigators, a well-timed ambush. Then she remembered an old story her friend Sarah once told her. A high-profile family feud ended when one spouse pretended to suffer a mental breakdown, prompting the other to let their guard down and speak openly. Inspired by this, Danielle began piecing together her grand ruse. Her performance would be threefold. First, She would stage an emotional collapse, planting doubts about her mental and emotional stability. Second, she would leverage Thomas's guilt to coerce him into a confession, ideally in a place she could control. Lastly, she would ensure the entire ordeal was documented. If she had to feign madness for him to let his secrets slip, so be it. The next morning, she made arrangements. First, she reached out to Sarah and confided in her about the deception, though she kept the specifics vague. Sarah would be her ally, someone who could vouch for her state of mind if things spiraled out of control. Next, Danielle contacted a lawyer friend from her gallery days, Julia Barnes, not to be confused with Julia Parker, who specialized in family law. Without divulging too much, she mentioned the possibility of needing legal counsel for a serious marital dispute. Barnes promised to keep her schedule flexible. To start the breakdown performance, Danielle stopped going to her prenatal yoga sessions and cancelled her usual lunch dates. She wore the same oversized sweater for days, let her hair go unwashed, and refused to leave the penthouse, claiming overwhelming anxiety. When Thomas came home, she greeted him with teary eyes and nonsensical mutterings about nightmares, and an unshakable fear that something was coming for them. She even let a few dinner plates slip from her hands, shattering on the floor actions that were partly fueled by genuine stress but amplified for effect. Thomas grew visibly concerned. No matter how distant he'd been, he wanted to maintain the facade of a supportive husband. He insisted on medical evaluations, but Danielle played the part so well, crying hysterically at the thought of doctors and medication that he backed off, worried about the negative press if his pregnant wife was admitted to a psychiatric ward. He needed to focus on Project Dawn after all, and a major scandal would undermine his deals. "I'm just so scared, Thomas," she would sob. "I can't sleep, can't eat, I feel haunted." She would bury her face in her hands, peeking through her fingers to see his reaction. Each time, he would awkwardly pat her shoulder, offering false reassurances while never revealing the details of his clandestine activities. Yet, cracks in his facade began to show. Once, when Danielle woke screaming in the middle of the night, he snapped, "For heaven's sake, Danielle, you have to pull yourself together. I can't handle you losing it right now." His eyes flared, but he soon retreated, collecting himself. I'm sorry. It's just complicated." Yes, complicated indeed. But Danielle knew she was close to her goal. The tension in the penthouse had escalated to a near breaking point. Any day now, Thomas would slip, and she planned to capture every incriminating word. She placed mini-recording devices around the house, hidden behind potted plants, tucked into decorative vases, and even taped inside the cushions of her favorite armchair. She tested each device meticulously, replaying her own false breakdowns to ensure the audio was crystal clear. The stage was set. All she needed now was for Thomas to deliver his confession. The hardest part was waiting her nerves frayed, and the baby's steady kicks in her belly reminded her of the stakes. She had to succeed, no matter how terrifying the path ahead might be. Unbeknownst to Thomas, events outside his penthouse realm were also heating up. Whispers of real estate fraud had begun circulating in the upper echelons of Manhattan's finance world, where competitors and regulators alike smelled blood. Julia Barnes, the lawyer Danielle had confided in, discreetly kept an ear to the ground. She discovered that an investigative reporter named Michael Delacroix, known for his exposes on corporate malfeasance, had been asking questions about Thomas Sterling. If the press got hold of Danielle's evidence, the fallout could be catastrophic for both Thomas and any unsuspecting co-conspirators. Cautiously, Danielle weighed her options. If she handed over the Project Dawn files to Delacroix, the story would explode overnight. The media would swarm, and Thomas might be arrested swiftly, or worse, he might flee the country with a well-placed network of allies. Danielle didn't want him to vanish before she secured her and her baby's safety. She preferred a more controlled approach. In the background, Julia Barnes laid down a legal groundwork. She prepared potential restraining orders in case Thomas turned violent or attempted to coerce Danielle into silence. She also arranged for an off-the-record conversation with a district attorney's liaison, hinting that a major real estate fraud case could be on the horizon. If and when Danielle delivered the evidence, the DA's office would be ready to pounce. But first, Danielle needed that airtight confession. Thomas, however, was becoming a ghost. He drifted in and out of the penthouse at odd hours, sometimes not returning until the following afternoon. His phone rang incessantly with calls he wouldn't take in Danielle's presence. She recognized Julia Parker's name on the caller ID more than once. Tension coiled like a snake, threatening to strike at any moment. One evening, Danielle faked a panic attack so intense that Thomas cancelled a meeting to rush back home. She was hunched on the living room sofa, breathing erratically, tears streaming down her face. When he stepped inside, she clung to him, sobbing about nightmares of being chased by shadowy figures. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, fueled by genuine desperation to protect her child. Thomas was rattled. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. Danielle seized the chance. "Why won't you tell me what's really going on? I know something is wrong. I feel it." He exhaled sharply, his shoulders trembling. For a second, she thought he might unburden his soul. Yet the moment passed as he regained composure. "Danielle, this is just business pressure. You wouldn't understand. I promise you, everything will be fine once these deals close. You need to rest." She forced herself to nod, every fiber of her wanting to scream accusations. But she played the frightened wife instead, whispering, "Just hold me for a while." He obliged, wrapping an arm around her. Under the glare of the penthouse lights, he looked more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. The man who once seemed unshakable was crumbling, and that meant she was getting closer to the truth. Meanwhile, her hidden recording devices captured every rustle, every sigh, every half-spoken admission. Danielle sifted through hours of audio, searching for a direct statement that would tie Thomas to the fraud beyond any doubt. References to offshore accounts or shell companies were frequent but indirect. She needed him to directly confess that he was knowingly breaking the law. Time was running short. Her due date loomed, and the stress was wreaking havoc on her health. She could barely keep food down. She needed a final push, something dramatic enough to make Thomas reveal his hand. The question was how to orchestrate the perfect moment, ensuring he felt safe enough or cornered enough to confess it all. Fate intervened in the form of a sudden, sharp pain that shot through Danielle's abdomen. She was 8 months pregnant, anxiously awaiting the birth of a baby who could arrive any day now. One evening, as she prepared a simple meal, a crippling cramp buckled her knees. Alarmed, she dialed her OB-GYN and was told to rush to the hospital for monitoring. Thomas, in a rare display of paternal urgency, helped her into the car and whisked her away. At the hospital, the medical staff performed an ultrasound. Fortunately, the baby was fine, but the doctor recommended an overnight stay to observe Danielle's blood pressure and contraction patterns. Thomas stayed by her side, pacing the corridor while the machines beeped in the background. Around midnight, a nurse named Jennifer Green, a name known for her expertise in high-risk pregnancies at Mount Sinai, entered to check Danielle's vitals. She mentioned quietly that stress could exacerbate Danielle's symptoms, urging Thomas to help her remain calm. As the clock ticked closer to dawn, Danielle feigned another emotional breakdown. She clutched her stomach, sobbing about the baby's safety, her own guilt at being a terrible wife, and the suffocating fear that everything was falling apart. Thomas, already exhausted, sat on a stool near the bed, burying his face in his hands. "Why? Why do we keep suffering like this? Danielle managed between sobs. I know there's more going on than just business deals. A fresh wave of tears fell. Please, Thomas. I need you to be honest with me. Thomas rocked back, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He exhaled heavily. Danielle, I never wanted you to get dragged into this. You were supposed to have a perfect life. His voice cracked as he mumbled, I made some moves, bad ones. But it's too late to back out now. Heartbeat thundering in her ears, Danielle gently reached under her blanket, making sure the small recording device was active. She forced her voice to stay calm. Why? I can't handle living with these secrets. Tell me what you did, Thomas. If you trust me at all, just say it. Desperation shone in his eyes. Words tumbled out in halting confessions. Project Dawn. It was supposed to be a one-time thing. But Julia and I, we expanded. Flipped properties, forged documents, laundered money to pay off debts. We manipulated prices, bribed appraisers. I thought it was the only way to keep everything afloat. Danielle's pulse soared. She blinked away tears, simultaneously listening to the golden words that would seal his fate. How long? She whispered. Thomas shook his head, visibly unraveling. Years. Started even before we got married. I didn't know how to stop. We're in too deep. Julia threatened to expose me if I bailed. We'll both be ruined if this comes out. For a moment, silence blanketed the room, broken only by the steady beep of the fetal monitor. Danielle's tears flowed freely now, both from heartbreak and the knowledge that she finally had the proof she needed. She inched her hand out to squeeze his. With a trembling voice she said, We can still find a way out. We can make this right. She didn't specify how. The lie hung in the air like a lifeline Thomas desperately wanted to believe in. He leaned over the hospital bed, burying his face in her hair. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I never wanted this for you or the baby. I was just so greedy, so stupid. She gently pulled him in, her free hand covering the lump under her blanket where the recording device lay, capturing every last syllable. Danielle had never felt more conflicted. Her heart ached, yet a fierce sense of triumph burned in her veins. Because after that night, there would be no turning back. Thomas Sterling's confession was sealed. Danielle was discharged the next day, both relieved and burdened by her newfound power. The recording device was safely tucked away in her purse, containing all the incriminating evidence she needed. Thomas was uncharacteristically gentle as he helped her into the car, so much so that she almost wanted to believe his apologies had been genuine. But she reminded herself of the bigger picture. Thomas might feel remorse, but it was overshadowed by years of deception and criminal activity. At home, the tension between them simmered quietly. Thomas hovered around her, asking if she needed pillows adjusted or a special diet, or anything else to ease her last month of pregnancy. Danielle forced polite smiles, feigning vulnerability. Part of her longed to forgive him. She had once loved him deeply, but a harsher part knew that any compassion could blind her to the immediate danger. She had to see this through. Meanwhile, back in South Carolina, Danielle's parents, Mark and Evelyn Thompson, grew concerned. They sensed something was off each time they spoke on the phone. Danielle's voice had a tremor, and she was evasive about Thomas's role as a supportive husband. They considered flying up to New York, but Danielle convinced them she was simply overwhelmed with the pregnancy. Her friend Sarah, however, was not so easily placated. She visited the penthouse, seeing firsthand the dark circles around Danielle's eyes and the forced politeness between the couple. After Thomas excused himself to the study, Sarah demanded an explanation. Unable to hold back any longer, Danielle opened up. I have proof, Sarah. He's involved in something huge. And I'm going to expose him. Sarah's eyes widened. She took Danielle's hand. Are you sure that's safe? What if I know, Danielle interrupted, voice trembling. But I can't live a lie anymore, and I won't let our baby be born into this nightmare. It has to end. Sarah nodded solemnly. I'm here for you, whatever you need. She paused, her face reflecting the fear they both felt. Just be careful. Later that evening, Danielle approached the next stage of her plan. She told Thomas she wanted to keep their marriage intact, that she was ready to stand by him, no matter what. She even suggested they talk to a counselor or a fixer who could help sort out the legal troubles quietly. He seemed surprised, but not entirely opposed. The weariness in his eyes spoke volumes. He was drained from carrying the burden of his crimes. Yet behind Danielle's reassuring words was a very different intention. She quietly reached out to Julia Barnes, providing her with the recorded audio. Barnes was both astonished and alarmed. It was even more incriminating than she expected. They decided that a legal confrontation was unavoidable. Barnes recommended they arrange a private meeting with the district attorney's liaison, possibly culminating in a sealed indictment and a carefully staged arrest to prevent Thomas from fleeing. The emotional cost weighed heavily on Danielle. Her nights were restless with nightmares of Thomas being handcuffed, of her child one day asking why their father wasn't around. But then she recalled the hospital confession, the look in his eyes as he admitted to forging documents, laundering money, and defrauding countless victims. For years, Thomas had lived a life of deceit and greed. She asked herself a question that offered a grim answer. If he's not held accountable, will he ever truly change? The day of reckoning arrived in a swirl of conflicting emotions. Danielle, barely able to stand on swollen feet, made her way to the district attorney's office. Julia Barnes was at her side, carrying a secure briefcase. Inside it lay the Project Dawn documents, originals and copies, and the digital file containing Thomas's recorded confession. They were ushered into a conference room with plain white walls, a long table, and a single pitcher of water. Two assistant DAs joined them, their solemn faces betraying the gravity of the situation. Danielle's heart thumped as she handed over the evidence. She recounted the highlights of Thomas's confession, careful to keep her composure. She explained she was terrified of retaliation, terrified that her child would be born into chaos, but also determined that justice be served. The meeting concluded with a quiet sense of finality. The DA's team assured Danielle they had enough to pursue charges of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering against Thomas Sterling, Julia Parker, and any other co-conspirators they could trace. Danielle left the building, tears streaming down her face. It felt like a betrayal of the man she once loved, yet also like a necessary act to protect herself and her baby. By the time she returned to the penthouse, Thomas was waiting in the living room, dressed casually but exuding a tense energy. He offered her a glass of water, his eyes filled with concern. Danielle, you look pale. The doctor said you shouldn't be overexerting yourself. She managed a weak smile, heart pounding at the knowledge of what she'd just done. I'm fine, just a little stressed about the baby. He nodded, perhaps mistaking her trembling for pregnancy nerves. As the evening wore on, he tried to engage her in small talk, baby names, nursery colors, even a possible family vacation once the child was old enough to travel. It was surreal, discussing such normal aspects of life while the sword of justice dangled overhead, ready to crash down on him at any moment. At one point, Thomas quietly admitted he felt guilty for neglecting her during her pregnancy. I know I haven't been the best husband, he confessed, eyes cast downward. When I look at you, I see how much love you have, and I don't know how to say I'm sorry. Danielle felt a pang in her chest, torn between empathy and anger. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby's slight kick. It's been hard, she said, her voice quivering. I just wish we could have been honest with each other. Thomas swallowed hard. For a moment, it looked as though he might break down completely, but he steadied himself. We'll figure it out, he murmured. That night, Danielle slept in the guest room, claiming it offered more comfort for her aching back. In reality, she needed space to grapple with the emotional avalanche of what she had set in motion. She wept into her pillow, reliving memories of their whirlwind romance, the lavish wedding, the moments when he would cradle her in his arms and promise the world. All those promises, she thought bitterly, were built on a mountain of lies. Sometime around midnight, she heard him shuffling outside the door, murmuring her name. She feigned sleep. She couldn't face him just yet. Tomorrow or the next day, the DA's office would move. An arrest warrant might arrive at dawn, or perhaps at a time carefully chosen to catch Thomas off guard. Danielle found no comfort in revenge. She felt only a hollow ache for the dreams that had died and the uncertain future that stretched before her. The moment came in the quiet of a Tuesday afternoon. Danielle was resting on the living room couch, her feet propped up on cushions. Thomas was on his phone, pacing near the window. Then came a firm knock at the door. Alarmed, he turned to Danielle, who shrugged weakly. She watched, her pulse racing, as he opened it to find two plainclothes detectives and a uniformed officer. "Thomas Sterling?" one detective inquired, holding out a folded paper. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering." Time seemed to slow. Thomas's face went pale. His phone slipped from his hand, landing with a clatter on the polished floor. He tried to stammer out words, denial or confusion, but the detectives stepped forward methodically. They turned him around, snapping cuffs around his wrists. Danielle sat up, feeling faint, tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't move, couldn't move. She watched as the man she married was led away, the front door closing behind them with a hollow thud. The penthouse was silent, except for her ragged breathing. She felt both a crushing sense of loss and a swell of relief. The facade was over. In the days that followed, the media erupted with the scandal. News outlets plastered Thomas Sterling's face across front pages, alongside speculation about the extent of the fraud. Julia Parker, too, was arrested attempting to board a flight to Europe. The DA's office confirmed that the case was built on irrefutable evidence, including audio recordings of Thomas himself describing the illegal scheme. But amid the public spectacle, Danielle had her own private battle to fight. The stress took a toll on her health, and one evening she was rushed to the hospital in early labor. Sarah was at her side, holding her hand as she endured contractions. Danielle's parents arrived, panic etched across their faces. Over 19 hours, her body fought through every wave of pain and anxiety until, finally, she gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Gabriel, drawing from her favorite painting by a Renaissance master, depicting the angel Gabriel's annunciation of hope. Holding him in her arms for the first time, she realized this was why she had to do everything she did. He was a fresh start, an embodiment of innocence in a world marred by deceit. Meanwhile, Thomas remained in custody, denied bail because of flight risks. His legal team scrambled, but the evidence was overwhelming. The Project Dawn files, corroborated by Danielle's recordings and testimonies from appraisers who turned state's evidence, formed a case that prosecutors deemed ironclad. A court date was set to determine the final charges and sentencing. Some nights, Danielle lay awake, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in a hospital bassinet beside her, wondering if she had truly done the right thing. She had loved Thomas once, part of her always would. But each time she recalled his hospital confession, she knew that love without honesty was a brittle foundation. She had to break it apart to rebuild a better life for herself and her child. The swirl of public drama gradually receded. The tabloids moved on to new scandals, but the legal process churned on, slow and methodical. Danielle resolved to testify when the time came, ready to face Thomas across the courtroom. She would tell her truth, not out of vengeance, but to finally set herself free from the illusions that had bound her. Weeks turned into months. By the time Danielle walked into the courthouse, her arms cradling baby Gabriel, she felt an unexpected calm. Dressed in a simple black dress, she took her place in the witness stand, meeting Thomas's gaze for a fleeting second. There was sorrow in his eyes, perhaps regret. She couldn't be certain if he understood the magnitude of his wrongs, or if he simply mourned the downfall of his empire. Either way, it no longer mattered. She spoke clearly and unwaveringly, describing the night of his confession and the lengths he had gone to cover his crimes. In the end, the jury's verdict was swift, guilty on multiple counts. The judge's sentence would ensure Thomas's absence from Danielle's life for a long time. As the gavel pounded, Danielle closed her eyes, hugging Gabriel close to her chest. She thought of sunflower fields in Charleston, of Dr. Robert Jenkins's lessons about honesty, of all the tiny betrayals that had led her to this moment. Through it all, she found the strength to stand tall. This was not the fairy tale ending she once imagined. Yet, in a quiet, resolute way, it was a triumph. She had chosen truth and safeguarded her child. The cost was high, but so was the reward, a shot at a life free from hidden debts and half-truths. And that, Danielle realized, was the best happily ever after she could hope for. Thank you for witnessing Danielle's extraordinary journey, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. If you found inspiration in her courage, if her sacrifices struck a chord, or if you simply love a gripping real-life drama, help us share this story. Like this video to show your support for standing strong in the face of deception. Share it with friends who need a reminder that truth can prevail, no matter how deep the secrets run. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories that celebrate the power of hope, determination, and justice. By joining us, you become part of a community committed to uplifting stories of courage, and together, we'll continue to shine a light on the truth. Thank you for watching.